She was just a young woman, lost and broken, writing a letter she never meant to send, a letter to her younger self. What she wrote changed everything, because sometimes the words we say to ourselves in the quietest moments become the loudest healing for a lifetime. This is her story, raw, real, and impossible to forget. The letter she wrote to her younger self. The quiet morning. The first light of dawn crept gently across Marjorie Lane's kitchen, laying soft gold on everything it touched. The teacup by the sink, the wilted daffodils on the counter, the small wooden clock that ticked like a heartbeat in the silence. Outside, the world was still, the kind of stillness that only comes after years of noise. Marjorie, 59, and newly at peace with that number, sat at her old oak table wrapped in her morning robe, her hair gathered loosely in silver curls. The kettle hissed softly behind her, and the faint smell of lemon balm drifted through the air. It was one of those mornings that seemed to arrive with a question, quiet but certain. And this one asked her, "What would you tell the girl you used to be?" She turned the thought over like a stone in her hand, feeling its weight. She had lived through enough to know that some memories never stop echoing. They just learn to whisper softer. After a while, she rose from her chair and walked to the small writing desk by the window. It was where she wrote her grocery list, thank you notes, and prayers. But today, the space felt holier somehow, as if it had been waiting for this. Marjorie reached for a sheet of thick ivory paper, the kind she saved for special things, and smoothed it with care. Her hand trembled just a little as she picked up her pen. She smiled to herself and whispered, "All right, baby girl, let's talk." And she began to write. Dear me, the girl I used to be. You won't believe how far you make it. Right now, you're sitting in that little apartment, staring at your reflection, wondering if you'll ever be enough for anyone. You keep thinking maybe love is something you have to earn, by giving, by pleasing, by shrinking. But one day, you'll learn that love doesn't ask you to disappear. You'll learn that peace begins when you stop apologizing for your own heartbeat. The pen glided over the page, steady and sure now. Outside, the neighborhood slowly came alive. A screen door creaked open, a distant lawnmower coughed to life, a bird called from the magnolia tree. But Marjorie hardly noticed. She was somewhere else now, walking through time. She thought of her younger self, 22, standing in the rain outside that apartment in Atlanta, suitcase in one hand and a heart full of pieces in the other. That night she'd been left behind. No explanations, just absence. And for years after, she'd carried that hurt like a second skin. But life had been patient with her. It had shown her that every broken thing she thought was an ending was just a place she'd rest before beginning again. You go in to think the pain will swallow you, girl. You'll cry till your chest hurts and still wake up with that ache in the morning. But listen to me. You survive it. Every time. Even when you swear you can't. You'll walk through heartbreak and find strength you didn't know was in you. You'll rebuild from ashes with your bare hands. And one day, you'll laugh again, for no reason other than the sun feels warm and you remembered who you are. Marjorie set her pen down and wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. The tears came gently, not from sorrow, but from recognition. She whispered to herself, "You really didn't know, did you?" Because that young woman she used to be, She'd fought so hard to be loved that she never realized she was already worthy of it. The letter continued. You'll lose people, Marjorie. Some will leave without warning. Some will break your heart just trying to find their own. Don't let that turn you cold. Let it make you kind, but wiser. Every goodbye is a redirection, baby, not a punishment. And when you start to forget who you are, remember your mama's voice when she said, "You come from strong women." You'll understand what she meant when the storms come, and you still find yourself standing. She smiled softly. The steam from her tea curled in the air like a memory, sweet and fading. For years, she had blamed that younger version of herself for trusting too much, loving too deep, forgiving too easily. But sitting there now, she realized that without that softness, she never would have found her way home to herself. She reached for the pen again. You going to grow into a woman who forgives herself out loud, who thanks the pain for what it taught her, who prays not for what she's lost, but for what she's learned. And baby, when you get there, don't you hide that light. Shine it so the next woman can see her way too. The morning had fully arrived now, sunlight spilling across the table like a quiet blessing. She folded the paper gently, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, I forgive you, sweetheart. You did the best you could with what you knew. For the first time in years, she felt no need to fix or rewrite anything from her past. It had all brought her here, to this morning, this peace, this version of herself that finally felt enough. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed, scattering white petals across her porch like little pieces of grace. Marjorie smiled through her tears, looked out the window, and whispered to the wind, Thank you for staying with me, even when I didn't stay with myself. The letter lay open on the desk, glowing in the sunlight, a bridge between the woman she was and the woman she had become. And for the first time in a long time, Marjorie Lane felt whole. The Gathering. The church basement smelled faintly of lemon oil and coffee, that old familiar mix that never seemed to fade, no matter how many years passed. The folding chairs were set up in a loose circle, and the soft hum of conversation floated through the air like a hymn warming up before the song. Marjorie Lane stood by the doorway for a moment, clutching her tote bag to her chest. Inside it was the letter, folded neatly, worn at the edges from the dozen times she'd opened it since that morning. She hadn't planned to bring it, but something about the day felt different, like the kind of nudge you don't argue with. Marjorie! A voice called from across the room. Warm, familiar, filled with the kind of love that only comes from women who've walked through fire together. It was Miss Reva, 72, the leader of their women's circle, the Golden Hearts they called themselves. Every Thursday, the group gathered to drink coffee, pray, and talk about the hard parts of healing that folks usually kept quiet. Marjorie smiled and waved. I'm here, sugar. Don't start without me. As she took her seat, she noticed a few new faces. A young woman, no older than 25, sat in the corner, twisting her hands in her lap. Next to her, an older lady stared down at her shoes, eyes tired, shoulders sagging. Marjorie recognized that posture. She'd lived in it once, when the world felt too heavy and you didn't yet know how to put it down. Oreva clapped her hands gently. All right, sisters, tonight's gonna be a little different. Instead of our usual prayer circle, I thought we could share something personal, something we wish we could tell our younger selves. The room grew still. A few women chuckled nervously. Others looked away, their eyes glassy with things they hadn't said in years. Marjorie felt her heart thump against her ribs. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the letter inside her bag. Lord, is this what you meant? She whispered under her breath. One by one, the women began to speak. Miss Lillian, soft-spoken and graceful, even at 68, said she'd tell her younger self not to marry the first man who made her laugh. There's a difference, she said, between somebody who makes you laugh and somebody who helps you grow. The room hummed with quiet mm-hms. Then came Deborah, who lost her husband 2 winters ago. She'd tell her younger self that grief doesn't mean you failed at love. It just means love's roots ran deep. By the time the circle reached Marjorie, her hands were trembling. Every story before hers had cracked something open inside her. The ache, the gratitude, the years. Revel looked at her with that knowing smile. You got something to share with us, Ms. Lane? Marjorie hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. Maybe I do. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out the folded pages. The paper was soft now, warm from her hands. She smoothed it gently on her lap and said, I wrote this to the girl I used to be, but maybe it's for somebody else too. And with a shaky breath, she began to read. Dear me, you won't believe how far you make it. You're going to cry till your chest hurts and still wake up with that ache in the morning. But listen to me. You survive it. You walk through the fire and come out still soft, still good. Don't ever believe you've been left behind. You're just being led somewhere you don't see yet. The room grew silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. The young woman in the corner, the one who'd been twisting her hands in her lap, lifted her head, tears glistening on her cheeks. An older woman whispered a quiet amen. Marjorie's voice quivered, but she kept reading. You'll lose people, baby. Some will break your heart because they're broken too. But don't let that stop you from loving again. Just love wiser. Love slower. Love yourself first. You come from strong women. Remember that when the nights get long. You'll be all right, even when you don't feel all right. And one day, you'll look back and thank God for not giving you what you thought you wanted. By the time she reached the end, her voice had softened to a whisper. So, my dear younger self, forgive yourself for not knowing what you couldn't have known. You did the best you could, and that's enough. Marjorie set the letter down on her knees. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Reva's voice, low and trembling, filled the silence. That right there, that's a healing word, sister. The young woman in the corner, her name was Tasha, stood up suddenly, eyes wet. I needed that. I swear I did. I've been thinking I messed my whole life up already, but hearing you say them words, it felt like you were talking to me. Marjorie rose from her chair and crossed the room. She took Tasha's hand in hers, squeezing gently. I was talking to you, baby. I just didn't know it. Tasha broke down then, the kind of crying that comes from deep inside, from the part of you that finally feels seen. Marjorie held her until the trembling passed. Around them, the other women began to hum softly, a familiar tune of comfort. Something holy filled that room. Not loud or showy, just sacred. When the gathering ended, the women lingered longer than usual, hugging longer, speaking softer. The letter lay on the table between coffee cups and napkins, its edges wrinkled from the weight of many hands. Miss Lillian touched Marjorie's arm. You ever think about sharing that beyond this room? The world needs to hear it. Marjorie smiled faintly. Oh, I don't know, Lillian. I wrote it just for me. Reva chuckled. Honey, sometimes the things we write to heal ourselves end up healing everybody else, too. Marjorie didn't answer, but those words stayed with her. Later that night, she sat on her porch, watching the moon rise slow over the rooftops. The letter rested on her lap again, but now it felt different, lighter somehow, as if it had done its work. She thought about Tasha, about all the women in that room carrying unspoken pain, and she realized something. Maybe healing wasn't meant to be quiet. Maybe it was meant to echo, pass down like a song. Marjorie looked up at the stars and whispered, Lord, if my story can help another woman remember her worth, then let it travel. The wind stirred the pages in her hand, lifting them gently as if agreeing. And right there, under that soft Georgia moonlight, Marjorie Lane made a silent promise. She would no longer keep her healing to herself. Tomorrow, she would share the letter beyond the church walls, beyond her little street. Because what started as her story was never meant to end with her. The ripples. 3 weeks passed since that Thursday night in the church basement, but the echo of that gathering still lingered. Marjorie Lane hadn't planned for her letter to travel beyond that circle of women. But sometimes life has its own way of passing truth from one hand to another. It started small. A folded copy slipped into Tasha's purse as she left that night. The young woman said she wanted to reread it when the world felt too loud. Then she shared it with her cousin up in Charlotte, who posted a photo of it on her social media with the caption, "These words found me when I was falling apart." By the next week, strangers were sharing the letter too. Women from different cities, different ages, different battles, all saying the same thing. I needed this. Marjorie didn't know any of it at first. She still spent her mornings in her little kitchen, making tea, talking softly to God like she always did. But one afternoon, her phone rang. Miss Lane? The voice on the other end was bright, professional, a little breathless. My name's Leela. I run a small women's magazine in Atlanta called Heartlines. One of our writers came across a letter online, a letter you wrote to your younger self. We were wondering if you'd let us publish it in print. It's been touching a lot of lives. Marjorie froze. My letter? Good Lord! I didn't even know it was out there like that. Leela laughed softly. It's beautiful, ma'am. It's real. Women are writing to us from everywhere, saying it feels like you wrote straight to their hearts. Marjorie pressed her fingers to her chest. Her heart felt full and trembling. I don't know what to say, she murmured. Just say yes, Leela said gently. The world needs more of this. That night, Marjorie sat by her window again, the letter open before her. It was worn now, its corners curled, the ink smudged slightly from tears that had dried long ago. She read it aloud, slowly, like a prayer, and when she finished, she whispered, All right, Lord, if this is how you want me to serve, I'll say yes. A month later, her story appeared in the magazine, printed on soft cream pages beside a photograph of a woman's hand holding a pen. The title read, The Letter She Wrote to Her Younger Self by Marjorie Lane. She almost couldn't believe it was her name in print. But what moved her most weren't the pages. It was the letters that followed. One from a widow in Detroit who said reading it made her forgive herself for surviving. Another from a mother in Houston who'd lost her job and her hope in the same week. and a handwritten note from a teenage girl in Chicago who wrote, "I ain't even grown yet, but you made me feel like maybe I can be okay one day." Marjorie cried reading every one of them. She started keeping a box, an old shoe box lined with soft fabric, to hold those letters. Each one was folded carefully, a little piece of somebody else's heart. She called it her proof box, proof that her pain had become purpose. Sometimes on hard days, she'd pull one out and read it, and every time she'd smile through tears and whisper, "See, baby girl, you did make it." A year later, the church invited her to speak at their annual women's retreat. When she stepped onto the stage, small and modest as it was, the room filled with quiet reverence. Rows of women looked up at her, some holding notebooks, others clasping their hands, waiting. Marjorie took a deep breath. The same warmth she'd felt that morning in her kitchen returned, that steady whisper of purpose. She began softly. "I once wrote a letter to my younger self, but I didn't know then that I was writing to all of you too." And for the next 20 minutes, she spoke from her heart about forgiveness, about faith, about the way healing sometimes comes wrapped in unexpected forms. Her voice broke once when she said, "Don't wait till life gets quiet to love yourself. Love yourself loud, even in the middle of a storm." Women nodded, some crying quietly, others smiling through it. When she finished, the room stood in silence for a moment before erupting in applause. Not the loud kind, but the thank you kind. The "I felt that" kind. Afterward, women lined up to hug her, one by one. They whispered things like, "Your letter saved me. I finally forgave my mama. I wrote my own letter last night." That evening, Marjorie sat alone by the lake near the retreat center. The sky was brushed with orange and violet, the kind of sunset that feels like a promise. She pulled a small notebook from her purse, one she carried everywhere now, and opened to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "Letters to my sisters." She smiled, remembering something Reva said once. The things we write to heal ourselves end up healing everybody else, too. And she knew she'd found her calling to help other women find their voices again. Months later, Marjorie hosted her first Letters to My Younger Self workshop at the community center. The room was filled with women, young and old, timid and bold, each sitting with a pen, a blank page, and a lifetime of untold stories. Marjorie stood at the front, her voice steady. She said, "Don't worry about writing it perfect. Just write it true. Talk to that girl you used to be like she's still listening, 'cause she is." The sound of pen scratching filled the room. Then tears, then laughter, then peace. And when the women began to read their letters aloud, the walls themselves seemed to hum with healing. And years later, when Marjorie was invited to speak at a national women's conference, she stood backstage clutching her old letter, the original one. It was frayed and faded, but still carried the same quiet power. A stagehand asked if she wanted to use the podium. Marjorie smiled and shook her head. "No podium needed, baby. I'm just talking to my sisters." When she stepped into the light, hundreds of women rose to their feet. Some had brought their own letters. Some held photos of the girls they once were. Marjorie began softly. "I thought I was writing a letter to my past, but turns out I was answering prayers from the future. Her voice wavered, but her eyes shone. You see, healing doesn't stop with you, it keeps traveling. Every time you tell your truth, another woman finds hers. And as she spoke, the women in the audience began to reach for one another's hands. Tears fell, heads nodded, hearts opened. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was a movement. A reminder that no matter your age, no matter your past, you can still write your way home. When the night ended and the crowd finally thinned, Marjorie sat alone for a moment, her letter resting on her lap. She traced the faded words with her fingertip, whispering softly, "Thank you, baby girl, for surviving long enough to tell the story." The wind lifted a corner of the page, carrying the scent of roses from somewhere unseen. Marjorie smiled, looking out over the audience one last time. Hundreds of women hugging, laughing, healing. And she knew deep in her soul that the letter she once wrote to her younger self had found its way into the hands of every woman who needed to remember her own worth. Thank you for listening to Marjorie's story, a reminder that healing begins with kindness to ourselves. If this touched your heart, remember it's never too late to write your own letter of love and forgiveness. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the Voices of Molly for more voices that uplift and heal. Until next time, keep shining your light. Your story matters.